Mr. Stephen Meade, I didn't. My last travel was Davos. Expected to see you there. I
Yes.
didn't because we just missed each other, type of thing. Maybe this coming year because I know they've announced they're still doing it, so
Yeah.
that would be good. But it's great to see you again, and you are definitely one of the leaders who care. We'll let people know about that more now. But can you just, if you will, formally introduce yourself and a little bit about you?
Yeah. Stephen Meade, lifelong entrepreneur, never had a job, which is a badge of honor now. But when I was in college, I was unhirable and I didn't learn why until many years later. I'm just wired differently. But retail stores in college, wrote 3 books when I was 20, fourth infomercial ever on television. So I learned a lot about infomercials. Kevin Harrington, the first shark on Shark Tank, was my media buyer when I was 20 or 21 years old. But the arc of my career started when I was 22. I went to work for Sandy Weil and Pete Dawkins, a bunch of guys at Travelers Group. And over 6.5 years, I read 357 books.
Damn.
It sounds like a lot. People are like, oh, no way. When you do the math, everything with me is very pedantic and specific. That's 1 book per week.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal was to read a book, pull the elements out, and teach my sales force a new skill every week. It's called stacking. So over 6.5 years, I trained 8,000 salespeople, became fully licensed as a broker, learned all about money. But I developed a system, Mark, called a bullseye belief system. So I have a 10-step, very specific way to look at how to build companies and scale. And I used that in 96 to build my first internet company. Took it public in 99. I was in my 30s. So I had my first billion-dollar public company in my early 30s.
Wow.
With a company that went on to become PayPal. So to date, I've started 11 companies. 3 I've had are public. So I do startups, but I'm a weird startup guy because I end up building companies that have public, velocity on them. And every company I start is managed by 9 tenants and outputs. And one of those tenants, which I think we'll dovetail into today, is every company I build, I like helping other people be successful at what they're already doing and passionate about. And that was really critical for me when I was in insurance sales. I could convince anybody to come work for me. I learned all of the emotional jujitsu, the psychological tricks, and I could convince somebody that it was in their best interest to come work for me. And if they didn't make it, it's just because they didn't work hard enough. And over time, I realized people are passionate about a bunch of things. I like helping people be successful what they're passionate about. I don't tell them what to care about. If you care about something, I want to help you get better.
Makes total sense. I was talking to somebody just before this about, how we both believe work-life balance was ridiculous. You don't stop work to have life, then stop life to have work type of deal. And who wouldn't do better in something that they have a passion for or love to do, right? Not rocket science.
Yeah. And I have a lot of sales quotes, and, one of them is people go, oh, well, where do you go for vacation or where do you go for fun? And I say, I don't go anywhere for fun, with a very stern, serious look. I said, but I have fun everywhere I go. And they're like, well, what do you do for vacation? And I go, I don't take vacations. Well, why not? I go, look, and you know this, Mark, I built my life where the events I get to go to are in vacation spots around the world with the most amazing people. So I've built my life around being able to go to places and events that not only are vacation spots for people, these are places some people never will get to in their life.
Right.
And I spend 80% of my time in these amazing vacation spots around the world, but I'm fascinated by the people I get to meet. I don't care about the place. I'm motivated by the people.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. The infamous life is short. Why not, value it every single time and every single moment, and you get so much, not only joy, but you get so much value and things done when you do it that way. And you kind of answered the next question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because I talk a lot and people talk a lot about their purpose, their why, and that's all critical. But I got to ask it in a different way. Why do you do what you do?
And as we talk, I was joking with you about all my backgrounds. I'm going to switch to my Monaco background since I love spending time there. So the reason I do what I do, and this is like the 10 steps I have on my program. Step 1 is called Design Your Destiny. And again, these are hundreds and hundreds of books and thousands of hours. So step 1 has 5 components. So it's like the old, again, this is age appropriate. There's a Ferris Bueller movie. I have one question, but it has 47 parts. So I looked at, if I were financially independent, if I had all the money I wanted to live off of the interest, if I had more money to do something for everybody else, I like to shift of what I would do for others. So money becomes more, money makes you more of what you are. If you're an ass, you're a big ass with money. If you're insecure, you're insecure. But if you're generous, you can become super generous. So step 1 for me is helping people identify what financial independent means to them. What's that number? What would they do for others? Mm-hmm. Then if you had all this money, what people don't realize is you wouldn't sit around and shop or fish or hang out all the time. Like motivated people like you and I, we'll get bored. We're not going to quote retire.
Right.
So then you have to decide, what's your lifestyle like? What kind of people do you want to hang around with? What kind of travel do you want? Do you want a company or a business? Do you want a product or a service? And I have 9 criteria, and every company I start has to give me a chance of at least 7 of the 9 criteria. If I look at it and says, oh, if I become a book author and I'm really successful, it only gives me 2 of the 9 things I want, I'm never going to be a book author.
Right.
Even though I'd be good at it. People are like, why not? I don't like traveling. And people go, well, Stephen, you travel all the time. Well, yeah, I travel to Monaco to Formula One and hang out on a boat with Prince Albert and a bunch of people I like doing business with. If I were a book author, I'd be in Des Moines, Iowa in the middle of winter of November on a Thursday night signing books to a bunch of Johnny Lunch Buckets. Nothing wrong with Johnny Lunch Buckets. Right. I grew up with that construction. That's not the life I wanted to build. So everything I do is passionate and motivated. And one of the last things, again, in this particular conversation thread, because I talk to students a lot in 11, they're like, well, Stephen, what happens if you don't make it? The entrepreneur is always like, well, Mark, what if you start this and it doesn't work? Well, what if you start the business and it fails, or this or that doesn't happen? Mm-hmm. Family tree, I retire my parents early. I know exactly what I'm going to do for my brother, niece, nephew, my friends I play soccer with. I'm going to fly them to game. Like, my life will be amazing. And if I fail, and I might, I can always go get a job and I'll be just like you. Because most of the people telling you, what if you fail, were people that I learned in sales. They don't have anything I want. So I'd rather aspire to be something great and be around people like that. And even if I fail, the aspiration on the journey is the motivation, not the money or the outcome.
Yeah, it's the enjoy the journey, all that stuff. But I remember something Kobe said, even way before he died, but it came out even more after he was tragically killed. He said, everybody's got that dream. They're going for the dream, and you got to have that dream. But the dream is actually right here, right now. This is the dream, what you're doing. And I thought it was a brilliant statement.
Yeah, and again, these are all my sayings. People are like, well, what happens for this or that? Or the state I live in is a state I call peaceful frustration. and I explain it. It's like going on a hike up a mountain. If you've ever been on a hike, every time you think you're almost there, the mountain turns and twists and back and up and down. But when you get to the top and can stand there and look around and go, wow, I made it. So I've built my mentality where I live at the top of the mountain and I can see everything I've done. I just don't know when I'm going to get there. Every hill is another journey. Every COVID is another setback. Every riot is another, slowdown. You just never know what's going to happen.
And you do your best to enjoy it, along the way. It's, I don't know if it's a good analogy or not, but my aunt, who just turned, she told me 91 3/4, because she counts them all. And she used to tell me when we had kids, enjoy every moment of the messes, the arguments, the being late, the stress, the this, that, the other. Because when it's gone, you're going to miss it. That's the time you enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's people like, why don't you get worried? I have my 10 sayings. Everything with me is numbers. I did a podcast on Davos where I broke down, Davos South by Southwest, Davos North. I did a podcast on my top 10 investments. But one of my sayings is 99% of the things you worry about never happen. So why worry? And that 1% is going to happen beyond your control, and you just have to deal with it. And all you can control is your attitude and your actions. I can't control what happened in the wet markets in China or what happened in Minneapolis. I can control my actions and my attitudes of how I address every day for myself and the people around me. That's it.
Well, it takes more muscles to frown than to smile, which is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So make a choice which muscle, what do you want to do? And
yeah.
And for some reason, a lot of people are attracted to the other, maybe because they feel it's easier, but it's actually a lot easier to smile than to frown. So
I've trained myself on that one. That one's got me in trouble in meetings and relationships where things are going tense. I smile. Why are you laughing? I'm like, I'm not. I've just trained myself. If I smile, it's not as bad as I think it is.
And hey, it works physiologically too, by the way.
It trains your physiology. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you kind of answered the question about what differentiates you. So if we talk about parents and whatnot, my grandparents always used to say with a Kiev accent, they used to say, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. And then they would say, and secondly, education, learn. So technology is moving faster than it's ever had, right? We have COVID, yes, which we thought that was a major undertaking to take on. We're still taking it on. But then we also had on top of that, when we thought it was full the glass, we had the racial injustice, which I think is going to give us amazing opportunities to make dramatic positive change. But with all of that, I think people have had more time to think a little bit about, like we're talking. How do you view, from all your experiences, how do you view the future, local, global, in terms of our awareness at work, our awareness at home, at play in the future?
It's a dangerous question that I'll answer because I'm not politically correct. I'm politically direct.
I love that though.
And so what I mean by that, I'm finishing writing an article right now with one of my best friends from high school around the racial injustice. And it's a dangerous topic, but when you actually do the math, there's not systemic racism in terms of actual killing and murder. And I know this is very political, but the number of African Americans that killed versus white is dramatically less. It's usually 3 or 4 times more white people, even though there's more encounters with the police with African Americans. And so I don't like slogans. Slogans aren't solutions. Mm-hmm. And so when I started looking at all this racial stuff, let's raise consciousness, let's raise the, systemic racism, like that's not a solution. So I started looking at it, and just on the racial one, we have a program coming out called Stop Police Brutality, Harassment Before Homicide. And it's very simple. If we pick Siobhan, the guy particularly in Minnesota who killed George Floyd, I think it was animus, full-on murder. I think it's going to come out. I don't think it was racist. I think just my opinion, I think it was personal animus because they worked together and he just didn't like the guy. That's my guess. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
The guy had 18 or 19 prior complaints against him. I have a lot of friends that are African American, some of my best friends. What I learned is it's the harassment. It's the stopping. Tim Scott, the guy that's the Republican congressman, mm-hmm. said he's gotten stopped 7, 8, 9 times just driving through the Capitol.
I saw that.
So it's this generational harassment that's the problem in the system. And that's what I talked about. It's not systemic racism. In my opinion, it's a systemic problem. And the problem in the system is the police are allowed to harass people. So I wanted to get the numbers from Siobhan. I wanted to say, out of those 19 prior harassments, was it all against Black people, which would have showed racism? Was it all against men or women? Was it in the home? A lot of it was verbal harassment. Mm-hmm. And so this concept of racism, to me, it's like, how do you look at the actual causes and try and come up with a solution that's not a slogan? And stop was really simple. Once I looked at it, and then I did this rant and I sent it to my friends. I sent it to Terry Neal and Kwasi Asari and Sugar Ray Leonard, and random people said, hey, if I'm some white guy with white privilege, check me. I don't, like, we're boys. I don't, just tell me. And stop, Mark, it was really simple. The S stands for special prosecutor. The police unions are the ones who fund the programs in the voting for the district attorney, and the district attorneys are the ones who investigate the police. That is an inherent conflict of interest.
Absolutely.
And Benjamin Crumb's a friend of mine, the attorney right now for George Floyd.
Wow.
He has to bring in every time his own independent autopsy doctor, because the police did an autopsy on George Floyd and said, oh, well, he had underlying conditions and he had and then the independent auditor said, well, yeah, but he died because the guy sat on him for 9 minutes. Mm-hmm. So immediately moving to a special prosecutor takes that power out of the district attorney and the police. That's an immediate change. It's not education and poverty and all this long-term stuff we've tried for 50 years. So the S is appoint a special prosecutor. Minnesota did that, but it took a legislative action to pull the George Floyd case away from the district attorney and assign it to Keith Ellison, the attorney general.
Right.
Because the unions fight that. And I'm like that. And my grandfather was president of a union. I don't have anything against union. I don't have anything against cops. I have things against bad process. So that was one. The T stood for transparency, which is the blockchain side. And again, the Democrats and Republicans are kind of talking around it. They're like, you shouldn't have a bad cop who can move from one precinct to another. With Siobhan, you should be able to see what that harassment was long before the 19th or 20th episode with George Floyd turned into homicide. There's a pattern of harassment. Even, and I don't know the numbers, even the guy that just shot the person in Atlanta over the weekend.
You got wrong, right?
12. Yeah. So there's patterns there, but all of that data is hidden. So the T stood for transparency. You got transparency into the actions, that officer would get an incident report pulled out to a special prosecutor. I'm almost done. The O's easy. The O stands for officer involvement. The thin blue line bullshit's got to stop. You can't stand there and let somebody do some of these things when an officer can intervene. And they're taught from the academy up not to intervene. They're shamed. I have friends here. I know this. They're shamed in the academy to not rat out their officer, but you got to stop that. And the P was a fascinating one. And again, I don't know if this is even answering your question, but it's top of mind and relevant. The P stood for prosecutorial speed. The average officer, when I looked at it, didn't get charged for 8 to 12 months.
Right.
If you're a family whose child was killed, regardless of whether it gets convicted or, like, the guy should get charged. That's what's happening again in Atlanta. They're charging him immediately.
They did.
Now, that probably won't go to trial till after the elections. He may or may not get off. And but charging people, because if you or I committed something like that, Mark, our dumbasses would be in jail in about 3 days.
Absolutely.
So this concept of stop, I'm like, if I have a slogan, I want a solution. That's sort of how my mind works on the companies I create or the programs and processes I try and help in. But the world's moving quick. We were going to write this thinking it'd take a month or two. There's movement in the Republicans and Democrats and globally around this issue. So the speed of change and communication is increased. I still think people have a flag in both camps, but on the racial one, they're about 70% in alignment. It's that outside 30 that I think needs to come together.
Yeah, but it does show, and that's pretty brilliant. It does show, though, that if you have a sense of urgency, you can get stuff done. And it doesn't have to take forever. And you're right, he's got 11 charges against this cop, Rolf, I think his name is, in record time.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that transparency of data and the ability to step in and either terminate or counsel or pull that guy off the street with a gun, it's the unions that have created the power against that. And the unions are the ones who fund the prosecutors in the district. So you've got this kind of corrupt cabal around the way things are prosecuted that has to be broken. And I think we're getting some movement on some of those things. So to me, the last point of that is, and again, this is where you get in trouble. That guy is not systemically racist. He's systemically a prick. He's systemically a police bastard. Like, he's harassed 12 people. Now, they all might have been African American, but my guess is he's probably just a dick.
Well, he's probably
and you
that.
need to stop that long before.
Since we're on opinions here, my opinion would be he definitely is that, but he may also be more of a dick to African Americans.
Correct. And again, if you've got that access to data, you need to be able to step in, because it's harassment occurring long before homicide. And that's how I think we stop this stuff, is finding a way to intervene much earlier.
Yeah.
To get these people out before something bad happens.
Well, the healthcare industry, it's kind of the same. Prevention's a lot cheaper and a lot more valuable than, curing it later.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to run out of time, but on that one, Mark, let's circle back, because the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
Technology moves at record pace, but government is still the same 3 Ps. It's still politics, people, and process.
Mm-hmm.
So the software we have, I launched software in 2001 after September 11th. I had built enterprise software. The 11th happened on a Tuesday. Thursday, I'm like, oh, all these assets are showing up. We could help with that. I created a program called Emergency Asset Management System, put a new logo on our software. By November, early November, December of 2001, our software was managing 9/11. So from 02 to 05, I had software, the only one in the world that allowed you to find things that are idle and move them around. Fast forward to Katrina. We get phone calls after Katrina. I'm like, our software needs to go in before. Can't do it after. We get called after Haiti. Fast forward to COVID. This whole COVID supply chain everybody's trying to solve. Not everybody, but within the government.
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping out with the Senate bill right now where they're trying to define the supply chain. It's called the Supply Chain and Medical Transparency Act. And I made a mark define the supply chain in 4 different congruent elements. And this is really easy. It's not. Element 1 is supply chain is all you can control in your supply chain for COVID are the assets that are owned by U.S. domestic manufactured companies. And if I use 3M makes masks in Minnesota, you can control that.
Mm-hmm.
The second layer is domestic owned foreign manufacturer. Even if 3M is a U.S. company, if they're making it in China or Timbuktu, you can't control the customs and the shipping. So any country in the world can say, oh, we need this, we're going to confiscate it. So you can't really control foreign manufacturing within your supply chain when a disaster happens. The third one, the government's trying to count in emergency suppliers. You can't count General Motors and Ford in to make respirators when they've never made respirators before. It's great they jumped in, but it still took 3-6 months. Right. Some of them don't work. Like the fourth one, which is where we play with our software, is the identification of what you already own that's sitting somewhere not being used. How do you reallocate or loan or donate 4,000 ventilators in California that they found through a phone audit and loan them to New Jersey? It's better, faster, cheaper, and safer to redeploy the assets you already own across city, state, local, government, hospital groups. And so our software, we've relaunched it, but it's the same software solving the same problem that they tried to do 20 years ago. It's interesting. Government always jumps up, and when these disasters happen, whether it's race, riot, or a hurricane coming in, rain, it's all the same. It's always proactive and not reactive until it becomes a big enough crisis.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you have to have the stock here. You have to have it here to be able to. Otherwise, you got to go looking like we did. That's
what I'm saying. The supply chain, they were trying to count all of the global stock, and I'm like, you can't. If China just did a day or two ago, they because they're communists, they took over one of the plants. It starts with an M, and they said, no, we're taking over this. Everybody that had landing orders for these masks, China's like, nope, sorry, done. Millions. I have friends that one guy lost $8.5 million because the supplier's like, oh, Sorry, not our fault.
Yeah.
So unless it's US manufactured or made or sitting here, you can't really count it in a disaster. But around the country, there's things that are idle where, you know, somebody bought 1 million extra. And there's another area that needs it. If you redeploy these assets, that's where we've moved back in under the COVID side to try and help with supply chain and try and help people. Where it's gotten interesting, back to the race relations real quick, is the poor cities and states, the Mississippis and Alabamas also are a poorer state and sometimes predominantly African American. The African Americans also are the ones who are more adversely affected with COVID,
Yep.
but can't get treated because the state hospitals don't have the same resources.
Right.
So this is how I'm helping other people. My software would allow a state like Mississippi to redeploy assets that a California owns, use them during a crisis because they don't have budget for it, save lives, and then send the equipment back.
Yeah, we need to talk about that more because we're talking to some major players about using technology to improve supply chain. And so we need to talk about that more. I did notice one really quick thing over time here is China offered the World Health Organization that they would store all sorts of stuff for the next crisis in China.
Yeah.
What a nice offer on their part, right?
Yeah, that way they have it all on shore in case they have to confiscate it.
It's amazing.
Commandeer. It's not confiscate, it's commandeer.
Whatever, basically take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Here comes the thing. This has been great. We probably have to do part 2, I think, and get in some good stuff. But thanks for participating, and it's always a pleasure, man.
Always great seeing you, Mark, and keep up the good work. Stay safe.